There was a point in your life when one summer felt endless. Not long, just endless. A school year felt huge. Waiting for your birthday felt like torture, and Christmas? That took forever to arrive. Even one boring afternoon could feel so stretched out that it almost hurt. And now something strange happens. You blink, and it is Friday again. You blink again, and it is somehow October. A whole year disappears so fast that you barely know where it went. Things that happened recently were actually 5 years ago. A song comes on, and you realize it came out a decade ago. You look at old photos and feel a weird shock because the time between then and now does not feel big enough to be real. And that is the mystery. Why does time feel faster as you age? Most people think the answer is simple. They think time feels faster because adults are busier. More work, more bills, more routine, more stress. Kids have free time, so life feels slower. But that is not quite right. Because even when adults are not especially busy, time can still feel like it is slipping away. And even when a child is busy all day, childhood can still feel enormous in memory. So the real answer is not just you have more to do now. It is stranger than that. Psychologists usually talk about this as a problem of subjective time perception, especially something called the subjective passage of time. That just means the difference between clock time and the way time feels from the inside. And yes, this is a real thing researchers have studied, not just a vague complaint people make when they get older. In one often cited study, psychologists Mark Wittman and Sandra Lenhoff surveyed 499 people between ages 14 and 94 and found support for the common feeling that time seems to pass faster with age, even though the effect was modest rather than absolute. Now this happens because the feeling is real, but it is not magic. Time is not literally accelerating. Your clocks are not broken. A year is still a year. What changes is your brain's relationship to experience. And one of the clearest clues comes from a very important distinction in psychology. There are actually two different ways humans experience time. The first is perspective time, which is how long something feels while it is happening. The second is retrospective time, which is how long a period feels when you look back on it later. Researchers Dan Zaké and Richard Block found that these two kinds of time judgment work differently. When people know they are judging time in the moment, attention matters more. When they look back later, memory matters more. That sounds technical, but in real life, it is very simple. Imagine 2 hours in a waiting room. While you are sitting there, those 2 hours can feel painfully slow. That is perspective time. You are aware of the passing minutes. You are trapped inside them. Now imagine looking back on the last 3 months of normal routine. Wake up, shower, work, scroll, eat, sleep, repeat. Those months may have felt normal while you were living them, but when you look back, they collapse into almost nothing. That is retrospective time, and it is one of the biggest reasons life can feel faster as you get older. So the first big mechanism is this. Time feels fast in hindsight when your brain does not have many distinct memories to separate one period from another. And childhood is full of distinct memories. That is because childhood is full of firsts. Your first day at school, your first best friend, your first sleepover, your first time getting lost, your first real embarrassment, your first trip somewhere far from home, your first heartbreak. When you are young, the world is crowded with new things, and new things force the brain to pay attention. That matters because novelty helps memory. Research reviews show that novel experiences often strengthen memory, partly because the brain treats unfamiliar things as important. Novelty is mentally expensive. The brain cannot just run on autopilot. It has to actually process what is happening. Now compare that with adulthood. By the time you are older, much of life is familiar. Not bad, necessarily, just familiar. You know how work goes, you know how your street looks, you know what your grocery store sounds like, you know the route, you know the login, you know the meetings, you know the faces. The brain gets better and better at compressing repeated experience because it does not need to study it every time. That efficiency is useful, but it has a side effect. When life becomes more repetitive, the brain lays down fewer vivid memory markers, and when there are fewer markers, the mind has less material to build a large feeling stretch of time out of later. So when you look back, the year seems to have vanished. Not because it vanished, but because it was stored more like a summary than a story. That is why an ordinary work month can disappear in hindsight, while 1 week on a trip to a completely new place can feel huge when you remember it later. It is not always about how long something was. It is about how much mental structure it left behind. And there is a second clue that makes this even stranger. In retrospective time judgments, people often seem to estimate duration partly from the number of memorable events they can retrieve. In Zake's model, remembered high-priority events help stretch subjective duration in memory. In plain English, the more mentally important moments your brain can pull up, the longer that chunk of life feels. That means the feeling that life is speeding up may have less to do with time itself and more to do with memory density. A year packed with change, movement, surprise, and emotionally marked moments feels bigger. A year full of repeated patterns gets compressed. This is one reason people often say their 20s went by slower than their mid-30s, or that one unusual year feels much larger in memory than 3 normal ones around it. The mind is not measuring time like a stopwatch. It is rebuilding it from stored experience. So that is the first mechanism. As you age, life often contains more repetition and fewer firsts, and repeated life gets compressed in memory. But that is only half the answer, because what comes next is weirder. Your brain is not just a recording device, it is a prediction machine. A huge amount of your daily life is handled through expectation. The brain learns patterns so it can move through the world quickly and efficiently. That is why you can brush your teeth while thinking about something else. It is why you can drive a familiar route and barely remember individual turns. It is why whole parts of a normal week seem to happen automatically. The better your brain gets at predicting life, the less raw attention each moment requires. And attention changes time. Research on time perception consistently finds that attention plays a major role in how long events feel, especially in perspective judgment. When attention is drawn toward time, duration often feels longer. When attention is absorbed elsewhere, duration can feel shorter. Emotion also changes time experience, which is one reason fear, urgency, or intense awareness can make moments feel stretched or distorted. You have felt this yourself. A scary moment can feel slow, a nearly missed step on a staircase, a sudden break in traffic, a bad phone call in the middle of the night. In moments like that, time seems to open up, but routine does the opposite. Routine closes time down. It tells the brain, you know this already, no need to fully inspect it. And when less attention is spent on the texture of a moment, that moment often leaves behind less psychological weight. So life starts to feel smoother, faster, and thinner. This is why the answer is not just you got older, it is more like this. Your brain got more efficient at turning life into a pattern. That sounds like a good thing. In many ways it is, but it also means adulthood can become dangerously easy to sleepwalk through. And then there is a third layer, the most human one. As a child, the future feels enormous. Not just because you are young, but because almost everything about you is still becoming. Your life has not hardened into shape yet. Who you are, what you will do, where you will live, who you will love, what kind of person you will become, all of it feels wide open. Time feels big partly because you feel unfinished. But as you age, something changes. You build a self. You develop routines, preferences, fears, habits, and a story about who you are. And memory plays a major role in that. Reviews of autobiographical memory research describe one of memory's core functions as self-continuity, meaning memory helps connect the person you were to the person you are now. It helps create the feeling that your life is one ongoing story. That sounds comforting, but it also creates a strange side effect. Once your life becomes more narratively stable, years can begin to feel less like giant new territories and more like chapters inside an already familiar book. That is not always sad. Sometimes it is beautiful. Stability, routine, family, and familiarity can make life warmer and safer. But psychologically, they can also make life feel shorter, because the more continuous the self becomes, the easier it is for one year to blend into the next. That may be why people often get hit so hard by nostalgia. It is not just that the past was good. It is that the past felt large. A song from school, a smell from an old house, a photo from a family trip. These things hurt because they come from a time when experience still felt massive, when the world had not yet become so processed, so predicted, so compressed. And there is one more uncomfortable thought buried in all of this. As people get older, their relationship to the future also changes. Research on time perspective shows age is linked to shifts in how people relate to past, present, and future. The future often feels less endless and more finite than it did in youth. That does not mean older people are simply pessimistic. It means time is no longer just something ahead. It becomes something visible, countable, felt. And once life feels more limited, each passing year can take on a different emotional weight. The years do not just pass. They pass against the awareness that they are part of a total number you will not know until the end. That awareness can make time feel faster too, not because the clock changes, but because your perspective changes. So when people say time moves faster now, they are often describing more than one thing at once. They are describing routine. They are describing memory compression. They are describing the loss of novelty. They are describing the brain's growing reliance on prediction. And sometimes, whether they realize it or not, they are describing the shock of seeing their own life as something finite. That is why this question hits so hard. It sounds like a question about clocks, but it is really a question about consciousness. Here is the deeper answer. Time feels slower when the brain is busy making a world. Time feels faster when the world has become familiar enough to summarize. That is why childhood feels long. Not because clocks moved differently back then, but because almost everything demanded full attention. And that is why adulthood can feel fast. Not because life became less real, but because the mind became more efficient. The tragedy is that efficiency is useful. The tragedy is also that efficiency can make a life disappear from the inside. And that may be the biggest thought hiding underneath this whole mystery. Maybe the length of a life is not just measured by how many years it contains. Maybe it is also measured by how much of it you were actually present for, how much you noticed, how much surprised you, How much stayed vivid enough to resist compression? That does not mean the solution is to panic or to chase chaos. It does not mean you need to quit your job, move countries, and become a different person every 6 months. It means something smaller and stranger. It means that if you want life to feel larger, you have to make it harder for your brain to sleepwalk through it. You have to break patterns sometimes. Take different routes. Learn new things. Go places that make you pay attention. Talk to people outside your usual circle. Let more moments become distinct enough to be remembered, because novelty strengthens memory, and memory stretches the size of life in hindsight. So why does time feel faster as you age? Because your mind gets better at compressing experience. Because routine leaves fewer memory markers than discovery. Because attention stretches time and autopilot shrinks it. Because memory is not just a record of life, it is part of what makes life feel big. And because as you grow older, you are not only passing through time, you are becoming aware of what time is doing to you. That is the real paradox. The years feel shorter not because they matter less, but because your brain has become more skilled at turning them into a blur. And maybe that is why the feeling unsettles people so deeply. Because when time seems to speed up, what you are really noticing is not the clock, it is yourself.